Welcome to our digital launch with business insights from the new NetClean report released on January 26. Today we are going to learn more about why businesses and organizations address child sexual abuse material in corporate environments and how that is even more important today in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the area of remote work. We will hear from experts and business leaders in sustainability, ethical leadership and remote work. And with me today, I have Elaine Widman Grunewald, who is a sustainability executive in the tech sector, author and board member. I have Mats Granryd, Director General at GSMA, and Marie Berner Moberg, Director and Country Manager, VMware Sweden. But before we start, I kindly ask you to take a short moment to read through the technical information about this meeting visible on your screen right now. If you have any questions during this seminar, please write your questions via the Q&A function. The agenda for today is that we are going to talk about the NetClean report very briefly. Then we are going to get a closer presentation of business insights section in the report. And then we go into the main section of this seminar, which is the discussions and interviewed with our invited guests. And then we finalize everything with questions for you guys in the audience. And we hope that we will have a very interactive and a good session. NetClean develops world-leading technology solutions that protect businesses' IT environments against child sexual abuse material, safeguarding against crime in the workplace. Our solutions protect both work computers and business mobile devices in multinational companies, government agencies, and internet service providers worldwide. Our understanding of the problem of child sexual abuse material has been gained over years of collaboration with law enforcement agencies, NGOs, and technology companies and research institutes. We also work to share our knowledge. A good example of that is the NetClean report, an annual publication that focuses on child sexual abuse crime. Our data in the report is gathered across the world from police officers who specialize in child sexual abuse crimes. It adds to the growing knowledge base worldwide about child sexual abuse crimes, and it brings a unique insight into what law enforcement and employers do to stop this crime. The NetClean report, COVID-19 Impact 2020, is number 6 in the NetClean report series and consists of 2 parts: a law enforcement survey and an insight to drivers for addressing child sexual abuse material in corporate environments. The digital launch today will focus on business drivers to address child sexual abuse material in corporate environments. But before we dive into that, I want to go through some key findings in the law enforcement section. The risks associated with lockdowns, school closures, and increased time spent online is something that law enforcement and bodies for child protection warned of early on during the pandemic. And in the report, we can see that these findings were correct. The report shows an increase in online activity, such as attempts to contact children, self-generated material, and in the downloading and sharing of child sexual abuse material over the open internet and on darknet. Confinement to homes meant that children have been isolated with their abuser. During school closures, children did not have access to mandatory reporters, which according to the respondents in the report has decreased the number of reports of offline child sexual abuse. Half the surveyed police officers reported that the pandemic has affected their capacity to investigate child sexual abuse crimes, mainly due to an increase in workload, limited possibilities to conduct investigations when working remotely, limited possibilities to execute search warrants, difficulties in conducting interviews with victims, suspects and witnesses, and slower court processing times. The findings in the report are still early indications. We won't know the full impact of the pandemic of child sexual abuse crime for some years yet. But we need to take these first insights very seriously. We need to act to safeguard the children at risk right now. We need to learn from these insights so that we can protect children when and if in the future we are forced to go into similar lockdowns and school closures. For this part of the report, we interviewed individuals who work in organizations that have identified the risks associated with child sexual abuse material being consumed, downloaded, distributed, or shared within the company network or on company devices. We interviewed individuals working in 5 areas: sustainability, ethics and compliance, IT security, human resources, and legal. The organizations were from a wide range of industries and from both the private and public sector. The interviews showed that the single most important reason for protecting a company IT environment and IT equipment from child sexual abuse material was a desire to operate ethically. And this desire went beyond corporate social responsibility and sustainability agendas. For some of the interviewed businesses, the decision to protect IT environment from child sexual abuse material aligns closely with sustainability strategies and CSR agendas. But for many, that connection was not that strong. Instead, there is a will to contribute to society, and several of the interviewees said that it should be a norm to address this issue in both both corporate world and governments and the public sector. They highlight that businesses are an entity that cover a large part of society, and together they can have a big impact. Child sexual abuse material in a corporate environment touches many parts of an organization and therefore have many stakeholders. With many stakeholders comes many drivers to why companies decide to act on this issue. We identified 8 main areas or drivers that, including the ethical drivers that we spoke about, are listed here. I touched on sustainability and CSR when I spoke about ethics. The interviewed individuals mentioned several big sustainability frameworks that align well with the decision to address child sexual abuse material in the corporate environment, such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals, UN Global Compact, UN Declaration on Human Rights, and World Health Organization Guidelines on Human Rights. And there is also the ISO certification 26000, which provides guidelines for businesses committed to operating in a socially responsible way. Another important driver is the policy compliance and making sure that breach of policy compliance is discovered, as well as vital that businesses ensure that rules are followed and acted upon. IT policies, code of conduct, and sustainability policies are usually relevant here, making sure that company equipment is not used to access illegal material. The third point that I want to highlight today is the risk profile. There is a risk profile around employees who engaged in criminal activities, as well as the risk to the company IT environment. From a compliance perspective, several of the interviewed companies point to that if someone is prepared to commit a crime using the company computer, they are probably a risk in other ways as well. And by putting control measures in place, companies can act proactively and keep control of the issue rather than be taken by surprise. We were talking about IT security perspective. Child sexual abuse material is often accessed or downloaded from risky environments, and employees using their work computer to do this often expose their device to different types of security threats, such as malware and virus. They can also leave traces that could lead back to the company. In the report, the interviewees also touch on the risk of blackmail. For human resources, preventing child sexual abuse material is about ensuring that the employees share the company core values and that they don't engage in criminal behavior. It is about taking action when employees have a problematic behavior, but it's also about being a good and attractive employer. Companies are a reflection of a larger society, and the companies interviewed all show awareness around the fact that if there is a problem in society, it most likely also exists within their organization. For employers, it is important to have employees that share their core values, which tie in closely with ethical values, compliance, and policy issues. All the interviewed companies emphasize that they cannot have employees that engage in criminal behavior. For the last part, the legal considerations, there is no external legal requirements on companies or organizations to protect the IT environment from child sexual abuse material. There are a number of legal aspects that companies need to consider and a number of laws that affect the implementation of a software to detect child sexual abuse material. Possession of child sexual abuse material is a crime defined by the criminal code in most countries, and such should be reported to the police. Reporting to the police is mandatory in some countries. The fact that child sexual abuse material is illegal helps companies drive the necessary internal processes when child sexual abuse is detected in the business IT environment. Committing a criminal act is in most cases a legal reason for termination of employment. That child sexual abuse material is illegal also affects company processes in regards to how incidents and the illegal material itself need to be handled. In countries where child sexual abuse is not illegal, companies need to rely on their internal processes. In the report, we also asked if the company's workforce were working from home, what consequences that had, and what they thought of the future of remote or distributed work. Most experiences of remote work was very positive. It has worked a lot better than most expected, and it has accelerated the technical development. Better work-life balance, reduced commuting, less need for expensive office space were some of the benefits. They also thought that remote work will be much more tolerated in the future and become the new normal way of working. However, there is also an increased demand and an increased compliance and IT security risks as a result. The interviewees highlighted how compliance risks always increase the outside of corporate culture. With distance and less social control, it is easier to commit crimes in the home environment and in the office environment. The home environment is also much less controlled IT environment. Some companies have seen an increase in cybersecurity attacks. We will talk more about this a bit later with Marie Berner from VMware. But first, I would like to go back to the issue of ethical drivers and sustainability. I would like to welcome Elaine Widman Grunewald. She's an expert of global sustainability and development and a pioneer and pioneered the concept of technology for good. She also recently released a book on sustainability, co-authored with Scania CEO Henrik Henriksson. Elaine was also one of the experts that commented in the NetClean report. So Elaine, what is sustainability? Can you frame it?
Well, sure. Not to be, overly general, because I think everyone has a different sort of understanding or maybe their own definition. But for me, sustainability is going back to the core basics of the triple bottom line. So the successful integration of like social, economic, and environmental factors into a holistic framework. And I think that, I mean, you could look at that from an academic point of view, you could look at that from a government point of view. My background has always been within the private sector. And in the business world, I would say, to simplify, it comes down to sort of two things. One is really the responsibility and what you do to be a good corporate citizen. So here you come into issues around your supply chain, business ethics, your codes of conduct, human rights, and of course, protection of children and vulnerable populations would fit into sort of that bucket. And this is what really gives a company a license to operate. And sometimes that license means you go beyond exceeding legal requirements that you were just referring to when you talked about different standards, in different parts of the world. And then you have the opportunity side of it. That's more about, what business value can you capture and can you create new business opportunities for yourself and new value for your clients. And it's also about, creating new solutions to address sustainability challenges. But in my view, you can't really be successful as a company if you don't do both of those, the responsibility part and the business opportunity part. I don't know, maybe that was a long answer, but that's a bit how I see it.
Excellent, thank you. Elaine, you have recently released a book about sustainability in which NetClean also was featured. In that book, you argue that sustainability is a business imperative. Why do you think that?
The imperative part comes, I know if you're in the Nordics or even more broadly, maybe you've heard of Johan Rockström and the Stockholm Resilience Center and planetary boundaries. And Johan wrote the foreword for our book, and Henrik and I had, lots of discussions with him about this. It was also around the time when the pandemic was kicking in, and in the planetary boundaries framework, there's these 9 global planetary boundaries. And if we pass those boundaries, we face, different catastrophic thresholds. And, according to Johan and other experts, we've already, surpassed 3 of those. We've already passed climate, nitrogen systems, and biodiversity. So the business imperative that we write about in the book, it's really no longer if something, extreme is going to happen, but it's more a question of what and how and when. And if you think about it today, it's about 2/3 of the 100 richest entities in the world are actually companies. And so I think that if we don't start to engage the private sector more actively on this journey and finding solutions and using the resources of the private sector, it's really a huge miss. So, the business imperative that we talk about in the book, it's kind of like, how do we get the power of the private sector for the greater good? And the book was really my and Henrik's contribution to that. In the book, we talk about, how do you use your own personal influencing platform? And so that's what we tried to do in the book, is to share not just our own experiences, but, we interviewed about 25 experts and, a number of CEOs in Sweden to share experiences and create a roadmap really for any leader that wants to start on that journey of their own sustainability mission.
Yeah. Um, In your book, you talk about integrating sustainability into the core of the business. How common do you think it is today that sustainability is integrated into the core of businesses? And do you think that we have far to go?
Well, I think we're making great strides, but one thing that I think a lot of companies, when they approach sustainability, especially when they first start out on their journey, they think like, okay, so if I appoint a sustainability manager and create a sustainability report, I'm good to go. I'm doing my part, and really changing the world. But the sustainability report is not really a strategy, and as Henrik always says, and we write about this in the book, that there's no such thing as a sustainability strategy. There's only a business strategy. So I think that while a lot of companies are getting started on that path, that there is still more work to do about integration. And when I say integration, I mean integrating all the functions in a company to be in harmony and addressing sustainability in a way that where they can have an influence that could range everything from product development to sales to marketing to legal to operations. All the core functions of a business need to be thinking about how sustainability is either a risk to their function or an opportunity, and be addressing that.
Excellent, thank you. When talking about sustainability, the environmental is often the first to come to mind, but it also covers other issues. How does child sexual abuse and child sexual abuse material come into this issue?
Well, I think, these days we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which are really a lens that all of us can use wherever we are in the world. And if I think back, 15 years ago, maybe we had the Millennium Development Goals, but they weren't as globally applicable. So today, anyone working with sustainability, you have this like amazing scientific, fact-based platform of what all the global challenges are today. And I think when it comes to the topic of child sexual abuse in particular, Sustainable Development Goal 16, which is talking about peace and justice, is a really clear link on that. So, I think what we've learned over the last years with the SDGs and more broadly is that sustainability is not one thing anymore. It's not just environment. It's about, if you're in the business world, it's about doing the right thing and knowing if you're a tech company or telecom, where I've spent the majority of my career, or if you're making, I don't know, plastics and packaging, you have to figure out which one of those goals are relevant for you, and how can you be a positive driving force in helping to achieve them, and not a negative force.
Talking about doing good, when we talk to companies, they sometimes need an ROI, a return on investment. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, I'm all about ROI. I think it's important to, when you make investments, to have a return on that. But it's also about, if you look at purpose-driven businesses and the ones that are really successful, it's not just about the return on investment in a financial sense. It's about culture and values, and about doing the right thing. And I would say, what's the ROI on your kid being abused, and what's it worth to prevent that? I mean, I've been an early believer in NetClean. In my time at Ericsson, we were one of the first companies working with you, and I don't know, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like 10 to 20 cents per computer. And for most companies in the world, we're talking about a round off error. So I would, rather than, have to answer this question about ROI, I would turn it around and say, if you're in any company, regardless of the size, and you know that there's a solution available to help combat child sexual abuse, why wouldn't you do it? That's, I don't know, a little bit my perspective on it, Anna.
Thank you very much, Elaine. We'll come back to you later. As we saw in the report, a desire to act ethically was the main driver for organizations behind addressing the risk of child sexual abuse in their IT environments. Therefore, I would like to welcome our next guest, the GSMA Director General, Mats Granryd. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Mats, you led the mobile industry in becoming the first sector to commit to the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goal that Elaine spoke about. And we at NetClean talk about sub-goal 16.2 and how crucial it is to end child sexual exploitation. What implications do you think that the UN SDGs have for your membership organizations?
Well, I think quite clearly the SDGs gives us a really good and intelligent framework to work within. Sustainability and driving business ethically is the new normal. Not just focusing on profitability, but that's important as well, but also on other factors such as climate and the people dimension. And within the people dimension, obviously, children is at the forefront of our minds. And when we adopted the SDGs back in 2016, it was actually quite easy. The mobile industry as a community had already begun their work, and we have worked hard ever since to make sure that we do progress against the 2030 targets.
Thank you. The industry that you represent is in many ways leading the global technology development with the aim to connect everything and everyone. In your opinion, does that put a different demand on leadership than we are used to?
Yeah, I think it does. And we aim to connect everything and everyone to a better future as well. And that better future, I think, is best described through the SDGs. And if you just take a step back and look at the mobile industry, it has a quite significant power and reach. When we calculate the economic impact, it's sort of in the 4.1 trillion US dollars, so slightly larger than the economy of Germany. And we connect 2/3 of everyone on this planet, so 5.2 billion people or so. So with that reach and that economic power, certainly there comes quite a lot of responsibility in making sure that we use this awesome platform for good and to make sure that we can address the current problems that we're facing. And I think, if I may, has sort of propelled this digital divide further. And that is of great concern, I think, for us in the industry, but also to a lot of other people as well. That the ones who are used of using digital equipment, they have become even more fluent, while the ones who are not using digital equipment are becoming further behind.
Thank you. What is ethical leadership to you as a CEO, and how do you walk the talk, Mats?
Well, ethical leadership is quite clearly the new norm. I think, as I said, just focusing on profitability is sort of in the past. Profitability is absolutely important. Don't take me wrong, but we also need to focus on climate. We need to focus on the planet. We need to focus on the people dimension as well. And as a leader and as a CEO, the world is becoming more complex, and we need to be able to address all three at the same time. It's not mutually exclusive by no means. It's actually driving each other. And as one example, as we are doing within GSMAs, that we launched something called the Digital Declaration, which is a aspirational declaration on how to act ethically when you are online. And you, Anna, are one of the CEOs that signed up on NetClean, which we're very grateful. I think we now have a little bit more than 80 CEOs that have signed up to this digital declaration.
Excellent, thank you. At GSMA, you use software to detect child sexual abuse material in your IT environment. Was it hard to make that decision, Mats, and why is that important?
Well, no, it was not very hard. I think this is the third company that I have been in where I've used a NetClean product. It's not hard to take the decision by no means. I think the trick, though, is to make sure that you are transparent about that you're using it and communicate properly to your employees that this is not a surveillance or type of technique that we are snooping in on what people are doing. This is more detecting and making sure that we protect the vulnerable children. And once you explain this properly, people understand, and there is absolutely no risk or no difficult questions. It's rather the opposite, actually, that people in at least in GSMA, in our organization, they would ask the opposite question, why we are not using it. And I think for me as a leader, it is very important to make sure that we do whatever we can to protect the vulnerable children, but also protect our integrity within IT systems. And as you rightly said, Anna, now when more of us are working from home, the security and safety aspects are sometimes compromised because we don't have good enough firewalls. So it's even more important now to make sure that we have a proper installed NetClean type of product to make sure that we that our systems are not compromised and abused in this way.
Thank you very much. We have to move on. Before I move on to Marie from VMware, I would like you to continue to enter your questions in the Q&A area of this meeting. So our final topic today is the new demand and challenges placed on organizations as a result of the new normal of distributed or remote work. The COVID-19 pandemic has propelled the development forward, and during this pandemic, a majority of the global workforce has been working from home. I would like to welcome Marie Berner Moberg, who is Director and Country Manager, VMware, Sweden. And I'm really happy that you are here in physical form.
Me too.
For you who don't know, VMware is one of the world's leading software companies in the digital workspace, and know more of this topic than anyone else. So, Marie, what do you think? Is remote work here to stay?
Absolutely. And I can just talk to myself. I never worked from home before, but I will absolutely continue to work from home partly after when we're back to some kind of new normal. But I'm really longing to get the choice to be where I want to be.
Yeah. So VMware recently released a global study on remote work. What were the key findings from that report?
Yeah, it was a lot of interesting findings of the report, and maybe the most significant one was the fear about the transition to remote workforce that I think a lot of companies had did not happen. So 67%, or almost 2/3 of the respondees, said that the productivity increased or stayed the same than before moving into to a remote workforce, and even more interestingly, 83% of the respondees experienced that they have adopted very well, and 80% that their work-life balance has improved during remote work. So I think that is really interesting findings. And also you can say that the vast majority, around 90% of the attendees or respondees anticipate a cost saving now in shift to go into a more remote workforce, and that the cost savings will come from, in first and foremost, the employee travel cost and facilities. And I think the real impact what the remote work has shown to us will be shown when we get to know how we can reuse those funds, the cost savings.
Yeah.
And there we could see interesting news if we compared with small and large companies, and maybe more interesting between high-performing and low-performing companies, where we could see that the high-performing companies, which grew more than 15% year over year, had a higher tendency to reinvest in both technology. So 56% of high performers versus 45% of low performers will reinvest in tech. And 50% of high-performing company versus 20% of low-performing company will reinvest in employee benefits. And that is really key, we would say. So to a conclusion, we would say that the recent shift from then going into remote workforce is a big opportunity for all companies. But it's up to the companies to actually seize the moment. Because if they won't, they will be outperformed by companies who actually take this opportunity.
That's really interesting. Some companies that we interviewed in the NetClean report saw an increased risk for corruption and ethical violation when the workforce work from home. And it was said that there are more challenges and more demands in the world where we work remotely. Does that mean that companies need to have more control measures in place in order to safeguard their integrity?
Yes and no, but they should be. We have a saying that is, it needs to be enterprise secure and end user friendly. So you need to have the control points and measurements and security in place, but it can't prohibit the productivity of the end users. So I think that is an important statement to do.
So, VMware is often talking about technology as a force for good, and that the industry has a responsibility to use technology as a positive force for good. If you take that and go with end user friendly experience, can you tell us and give us more concrete examples what VMware is doing in this space?
Yeah. First and foremost, we collaborate with companies like you, NetClean, which I think is a super good way of looking at it, that we, with our solutions, can provide our users secure and fast access. And also intrinsic security. And then if we can add the component of the ethical values which you bring into the technology, I think that is great. Another example is what we are doing for a healthcare region, very close to where we are now, the Gothenburg healthcare region, which we have helped with a project. They saw an issue with doctors and nurses spending too much time logging into slow systems, which kept them from spending time with patients, which actually led to attrition among the healthcare personnel. So we have helped them with a project we call Simplified Access, which actually saves the region 200,000 care hours per month.
Wow.
It's like increasingly sums which the healthcare personnel can spend on the patients giving care rather than working with the IT solution. And that is what I mean as tech as a force for good.
That's amazing. Good work. We have been talking about ethical leadership and increasingly important as an increasingly important thing to businesses today and tomorrow. What does that mean to you as a leader, and how do you walk the talk?
I'm a firm believer of value-based leadership, that you need to really act and live your values. And I think this, in all time, but especially during the pandemic, it's important to lead with empathy and urgency, to care deeply and act decisively, and combine those two as a leader, both for our employees and for our customers.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Marie, for joining here in Gothenburg.
Thank you.
Happy to have you. So we will continue with some questions from the audience. So I have a question to GSMA, Mats, if you are there.
Where?
Child sexual abuse, online and offline, and its scale remain unspoken about. How can tech sector help to raise awareness about this new epidemic affecting so many children who are now mandated to learn online?
That's a good question. First is to talk about it. Second is to work hard with notice, takedown service, work with other helplines and information that the industry is doing. Once it's detected, it's not just to shut it down. It has to be done in a very controlled and wise way. And we, the industry, are working with several different institutions that are experts in this field. So I think talking about it and making sure that we have processes already in place is the best prevention we can do for the moment.
So Mats, do you have any initiatives where you actually are educating the children in internet behavior?
Well, to some extent, but I wouldn't exaggerate that. We have tools, MIST tools, as it's called, training tools on how to use your mobile phone. And it's being used predominantly in Africa and South Asia, because it is one of the areas where people are most reluctant to use internet. As we know, half of the world's population are connected to internet and half is not. And out of that 50% of the world's population, almost everyone lives beneath a mobile broadband coverage, which is a 3G or 4G coverage, but they choose not to connect to. And it's only 600 million people that are not covered, but the vast majority of almost 3 billion people are covered, but they choose not to. And of course, skills is one, affordability is a third one, lack of local relevant content is the third one. But the fourth one, which the question is all about, is around this stigma of bad things happening on internet. So yes, there are trainings that is going on, but I wouldn't emphasize that too much. And that's certainly an area where we could and we should step up.
Thank you very much. I have a question for you, Marie, as well. Remote learning is not only the future of education, but because of COVID-19 pandemics. I take it again. Remote learning is not only the future of education, but because of COVID-19, the present. What are we and we're doing for making children safer online?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are also engaging in how we can make sure that school can enable our solutions on a more affording way than other companies, and make sure that we really help leverage in this situation. And I think in the Nordics we are pretty far ahead, but also to make sure that goes for the same in other areas of the country, of the world as well.
Thank you. Mats, I'm not sure if you can answer this question. What is GSMA doing anything about the new EU regulation preventing companies to track child sexual abuse material online?
No, I think no, I don't dare to comment on that one.
No, I understand that. All right. I don't have a question for Elaine from the audience, so I will take an opportunity, Elaine, to ask you a question if that is okay.
Sure.
Elaine, you have extensive experience from working with sustainability. In your opinion, has the awareness of child sexual abuse and the attitudes towards this issue changed over time?
I think, it's a very difficult topic. So, it's not like when, I don't know, when you're talking about energy efficiency and you can talk to business and product leaders about it within a company. So I think it is a very difficult topic, but thanks to the efforts of a number of organizations like NetClean and also Childhood Foundation and Thorn and many others, that awareness is growing. And I think that it's a topic that really needs to be approached as humans on a very human level, because whether you have children of your own or not, you recognize that children can be vulnerable. And so I think maybe it's a silver lining of the whole pandemic that this topic, as well as, physical abuse in general and child abuse in general, not only child sexual abuse, you're starting to see more mainstream media covering this topic and more businesses starting to want to react on this topic. So I think it is growing, but we need much, much, much more awareness. And I know, NetClean is pretty well known in Sweden, but it's almost like we need this like massive information campaign about what some of the solutions are. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to be found in technology, not least of which like using AI to be much more efficient in finding these images. But we also know that with technology, there's always two sides to the coin. So it's a race, right? You know, for all the good you can do an equal amount of bad. So I think that we need more of like a massive awareness and policy campaign. It is changing, but not fast enough.
Thank you very much. Thank you all my guests today. It is really difficult to understand the scale of child sexual abuse crime. However, it is easy to understand that we must galvanize a response. We've heard all today about the different drivers a company can have in order to put measurements in place and help protect children. If we think of it as a giant puzzle where everyone must collaborate to form a full picture, law enforcement forms a huge part here, and we are grateful to all the law enforcement professionals who had contributed with their knowledge and expertise to our report. Another part of the puzzle is the private industry and the private sector employers who with technology can help and detect report material they find. Their part in this picture is vital, and we are equally grateful to those from these sectors who took the time to speak to us and share their insights into why a business decides to work to stop the spread of child sexual abuse material. At NetClean, we are big advocates of ethical leadership and the importance of incorporating ethical thinking and strategies into the core of a business. Businesses have resources, power, and sometimes sheer size to be a force for good and to lead with possible developments of the world. We have heard from VMware what they are doing, and we have heard from Mats what GSMA is doing. And this is why Tech for Good is so important. This year's report really showed how much some businesses are invested in this issue. I'm pleased that more businesses are now starting to understand that a simple, tangible action can mean so much. By ensuring that IT equipment used by employees cannot be used to download, consume and distribute child sexual abuse material, employers can stop criminal activity, keep their IT environment clean, and help protect and safeguard children. Thank you to the experts, Elaine, Mats and Marie, and to all of you for participating at this important launch. More details about the drivers for addressing child sexual abuse material in corporate environment and how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected child sexual abuse crime worldwide can be found in the report that you can read or download as a PDF on netclean.com. Thank you very much for today and stay safe.